The hall was buzzing with quiet conversations and the soft shuffle of people moving around. It was a place reserved for the best musicians, critics, and legends of the music world, and it carried a kind of weight that made even the most confident performers feel a little nervous. Yet, in the midst of all this, a young woman appeared at the edge of the room. She was not loud or demanding attention. She moved with a quiet grace, almost as if she were a part of the background, blending in with the shadows and the muted lighting. She had always loved music, but her life had been far from the grand stages and prestigious halls. She had grown up in a small town, where the nearest concert hall was hours away, and most people didn't think much about the beauty of a piano melody. Her childhood was filled with the simple joy of playing on an old, slightly worn instrument that had belonged to her grandparents. She had spent countless hours exploring every key, learning to coax the sweetest sounds from it, practicing until her fingers hurt, but her heart felt full. The invitation to this hall had come unexpectedly. A friend, knowing how much she loved music and recognizing her talent, had managed to get her a chance to attend a special rehearsal where some of the most respected figures in the music world were present. It was not a performance where she was supposed to play, at least not officially. But when she walked in, she could feel the energy in the room and knew that this was her moment to just be there, to absorb everything, to feel the atmosphere where legends mingled and music floated in the air like an invisible, delicate thread. She carried her small notebook of sheet music with her, a collection of pieces she had written herself, not meant for anyone else's eyes. Her hands were steady, but her heart raced with a mix of excitement and fear. She had always been shy about showing her music to others. The thought of playing in front of anyone, let alone some of the greatest musicians she had ever admired from afar, made her stomach flutter. And yet, there was a quiet determination in her eyes, a calmness that came from knowing that this was what she loved to do and that, for at least a few moments, she could allow herself to follow that passion. The room was larger than she expected, with high ceilings that seemed to stretch toward the sky and walls lined with portraits of musicians who had passed through there. The polished wooden floor reflected the soft lights above, and the grand piano at the center seemed almost alive under the glow. People were scattered across the room, some tuning their instruments, others speaking in hushed tones. There were small groups huddled near the edges, discussing pieces they had worked on, and a few individuals sat alone, lost in thought or quietly practicing their own music. She moved slowly, deliberately, trying not to draw attention. Her shoes made barely a sound against the wooden floor, and she kept her head slightly lowered, as if trying to disappear into the space around her. Yet, despite her attempt to remain unnoticed, there was something about her presence that made a few heads turn. Not because she was trying to be seen, but because there was an air of focus and sincerity in her that people instinctively recognized. It was the kind of presence that did not demand attention, yet somehow captured it. As she reached the piano, she paused for a moment, taking in the instrument before her. It was magnificent, with a glossy black finish that reflected the lights above and keys that seemed to wait patiently for someone to awaken them. She could feel the weight of history in that piano, the countless hands that had danced across those keys, the melodies that had been born there and carried out into the world. It was both intimidating and inspiring. She opened her notebook and carefully laid it on the stand, the pages rustling softly in the still air. Her fingers hovered above the keys, feeling the smooth surface beneath them. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, and tried to let go of the nervousness. In her mind, she replayed the countless hours she had spent practicing, the music that had become a part of her soul. She reminded herself that she was there not to prove anything, but simply to play, to let the music flow through her and out into the space around her. People continued their conversations, some glancing over occasionally, curious about the quiet figure at the piano. But no one interfered, and no one asked her to stop. It was as if the room had subtly shifted to accommodate her presence, giving her a small pocket of space where she could be herself. She appreciated this unspoken courtesy, feeling a little more at ease. Her first touch on the keys was gentle, almost tentative, like testing the water before diving in. The sound that emerged was soft but clear, a delicate note that seemed to hang in the air for just a moment before fading. She adjusted her fingers, and the next notes came more confidently, flowing into a melody that was both simple and beautiful. She played with her heart, letting the music guide her hands, letting each note carry a part of her story, her emotions, her dreams. As the melody unfolded, something remarkable began to happen. The conversations in the room started to dwindle, the shuffling of feet slowed, and eyes that had been wandering gradually turned toward the piano. People were listening, drawn in by the sincerity and depth of her playing. It was not flashy or showy, but it had a power that was quietly commanding. The kind of music that does not demand attention but earns it effortlessly. For the first time, she felt a sense of connection with the people around her. Not through words or gestures, but through the music itself. It was as if the piano had become a bridge, linking her quiet passion with the recognition of those who understood and appreciated the art. She could feel the energy of the room shifting, a subtle but undeniable change as the presence of her music filled the space. The young woman did not notice it at first, completely absorbed in her performance. She played not for applause or praise, but for the sheer love of the music. Each note was a whisper of her soul, each chord a reflection of her journey. And yet, as she continued, she became aware of the subtle reactions around her. A hand stopped moving midair as a musician paused to listen. Eyes widened in surprise and admiration. Conversations had ceased entirely, leaving a quiet, almost reverent atmosphere. She continued, encouraged not by recognition but by the feeling that she was doing exactly what she was meant to do. The room had become a silent audience, fully present, fully attentive. She felt a sense of calm and fulfillment that she had never experienced before. The music was no longer just notes on a page. It was a living, breathing expression of everything she had carried with her, everything she had learned, everything she hoped to share. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, the silence lingered for a few moments longer, as if the room itself needed time to absorb what had just been created. Then, slowly, there were murmurs of admiration, heads nodding, and quiet conversations resuming, but with a new sense of awe and appreciation. She smiled softly, feeling a quiet pride, not in herself, but in the music and the moment she had been able to share. She gathered her notebook and rose from the piano, her movements still calm and unassuming. She had entered the hall as a quiet observer, almost invisible, and yet she had left an impression that would linger. It was a beginning, a small but powerful step into a world she had only dreamed of. And as she walked back toward the edge of the room, she felt the warmth of possibility, the sense that something beautiful had started here, quietly, without fanfare, but with undeniable presence. She sat there for a moment, hands resting lightly on the keys, feeling the piano beneath her fingertips as though it were alive. The hall had become quieter, almost reverent, and a strange mix of nervousness and excitement stirred within her. She had never played in front of such an audience, not like this, surrounded by people whose faces she had only ever seen in magazines or online videos. Yet the quiet energy of the room seemed to encourage her, to tell her that this was the moment she had been waiting for. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes. Her mind wandered briefly to the years she had spent alone, practicing in a small, dimly lit room, the piano's notes filling the empty space. She remembered her fingers slipping over the keys late at night, her heart racing when she discovered a new chord that sounded just right. She remembered the joy of learning, the frustration of mistakes, the persistence to try again and again until the melody matched the sound in her mind. That memory gave her courage. She opened her eyes slowly, letting the room's atmosphere settle around her. She pressed the first key, and the sound seemed to echo in the hall, soft but clear. It was a gentle note, like a whisper inviting attention. She hesitated only for a second, letting the tone resonate, before following it with a few more notes. Gradually, a melody began to form, delicate and full of emotion. She let her fingers move naturally, allowing the music to take shape without forcing it, letting the notes flow from her mind and heart straight to the piano. At first, only a few people noticed her playing. A few glances, a pause in conversation. But the music had a way of finding its listeners. It started subtly, drawing attention like the first rays of sunlight spreading across a dark room. People began to turn their heads, some shifting their chairs closer, others stopping mid-step. There was something in her music that was unpretentious yet powerful, something that did not rely on technical showmanship but on the sincerity of feeling. She closed her eyes again, feeling each note in her chest before sending it out into the room. Her melodies were simple, not overly complicated, but they carried an emotional weight that spoke to everyone listening. She thought about the stories she had lived, the moments of happiness and struggle, the nights of doubt and the mornings of hope. All of it found a voice in her music. It was not just a performance. It was a conversation between her soul and the hall, between her heart and the audience. Slowly, the people in the room stopped what they were doing entirely. A few musicians who had been practicing their own pieces paused, holding their bows and instruments mid-air. Critics and listeners who had been murmuring quietly leaned forward, captivated. The young woman at the piano did not look up, but she could sense the shift in energy. The hall had gone from a place of casual activity to a space entirely focused on her music. It was as if, for a brief time, nothing else existed except the melody she created. Her fingers moved faster now, with confidence and fluidity, but the music remained soft, intimate. She did not want to overwhelm the listeners. She wanted them to feel it, to experience it as a gentle wave passing through the room. Each chord she played was deliberate, each pause meaningful. She had learned through years of practice that silence was just as important as sound, that the spaces between notes allowed the music to breathe and the audience to absorb it. Occasionally, her eyes opened just enough to see a face or two, and she noticed expressions of wonder and amazement. Some people had their hands on their chests, as though trying to hold onto the feelings the music had stirred. A few had tears in their eyes, quietly hidden, and she felt a pang of humility. She had not expected this reaction, and yet it gave her a profound sense of fulfillment. She realized that music could touch people in ways words never could, that it could create connections invisible yet unbreakable. Minutes passed, though it felt longer to her. The young woman was completely absorbed in the performance, losing herself in the rhythm and flow of her own creation. She forgot about the legends watching her, the critics evaluating, the subtle expectations of the room. She forgot the nervousness, the doubts, the fear of judgment. All that mattered was the music and the dialogue it created with everyone present. It was an unspoken communication, reaching hearts in ways that eyes or mouths could never accomplish. She started to notice the small details around her, not as distractions but as elements that added texture to the moment. The way the light reflected off the polished piano keys, the slight creak of the wooden floor under a shifting chair, the gentle rustle of a sheet of music someone else had left open. All of these became part of the environment, part of the performance, like the subtle undertones of a painting that give it depth. She was not just playing the piano. She was participating in a living, breathing scene of human experience, and she felt grateful to be a part of it. Occasionally, she changed tempo, letting the music slow to a languid, almost meditative pace before picking up again with subtle crescendos. She could feel the attention in the room tighten and relax in rhythm with her playing. There was a profound intimacy building, a sense that every listener was experiencing the music personally, yet they were all connected in that shared moment. It was a rare sensation, one that she would carry with her for the rest of her life. She remembered the advice of an old teacher she once had, who had said that the true power of music was not in the technique or in how fast or complicated it could be played, but in how deeply it could touch another's soul. She smiled softly to herself, realizing that she was experiencing that truth firsthand. Every note she played seemed to whisper that understanding, and she felt a sense of peace knowing that she had finally discovered a way to communicate without needing words. As the piece she had started began to draw toward its conclusion, she allowed herself to linger on a few final chords. They were soft, resonant, and lingering, allowing the sound to settle into the air like the last rays of a sunset before night falls. The hall seemed to hold its breath, as if unwilling to disturb the fragile, beautiful silence that had followed her melody. When the final note faded, she kept her hands on the keys for a brief moment, letting the room feel the absence of sound, the delicate stillness that completed the experience. For a few moments, there was no movement, no sound, only a collective exhale from those present. Then, quietly, someone whispered a word of praise, followed by another and another. People began to look at her, faces shining with admiration and disbelief. Some had tears, some had smiles, and all had a quiet respect for what they had just witnessed. It was not an applause filled with clapping and shouting, but a recognition far deeper, a testament to the power of genuine, heartfelt music. The young woman rose slowly, feeling a mix of relief, joy, and humility. She had entered the hall as a quiet observer, unsure of herself and hesitant about her place, and she had become the center of attention without intending to be. Yet she did not feel pride in the ordinary sense. She felt gratitude for the music, for the audience, for the chance to share a piece of herself in the purest way she knew how. As she gathered her notebook and stepped away from the piano, a few people approached, quietly, to compliment her, to ask questions, to simply acknowledge the impact she had made. She responded with the same gentle humility that had characterized her entire demeanor, nodding and smiling, feeling more connected to this new world she had only dreamed of. It was an introduction without words, a beginning of a journey where her music would speak louder than anything else. In that quiet hall, with its grand piano and polished wood floors, with legends of music and listeners alike captivated by her performance, she understood something important. Talent could emerge in unexpected ways, and even a single person, moving silently and with sincerity, could command the attention of the greatest in their field. It was a moment of revelation, not just for her, but for everyone who had witnessed it. And it was a moment that none of them would forget. As her fingers continued to move over the keys, the young woman felt a strange mixture of freedom and focus. The music had grown bolder now, more expressive, yet it retained its delicacy. Each note was intentional, a brushstroke in a painting she was creating with sound. The hall seemed to breathe with her, the audience leaning in unconsciously, drawn into the unfolding melody, as though it were a story being told directly to each of them. She had never experienced anything like this before. Normally, playing the piano was a private affair, something between her and the instrument. But here, in this grand hall surrounded by the greatest musicians and critics, it felt like her soul was reaching out, connecting with the world in a way words never could. Her heart raced with a mixture of exhilaration and humility. Every glance she caught from the audience, every quiet reaction, made her feel both nervous and encouraged. The melody shifted, moving from soft and gentle to a more complex rhythm, intricate and flowing. She played with a sensitivity that allowed each note to sing on its own while still blending seamlessly with the next. The listeners were spellbound. Conversations had completely stopped. People who had been tuning their instruments, adjusting chairs, or speaking in hushed tones had frozen, their eyes glued to her hands, their ears drinking in the music. It was a quiet kind of awe, but it was absolute and complete. A few of the legends in the room exchanged glances. These were people whose careers had been built on extraordinary talent, whose ears had heard countless performances over decades. And yet, there was a shared recognition, a silent acknowledgement that what they were hearing was remarkable. The music did not rely on flashy techniques or dramatic gestures. It relied on honesty, depth, and raw emotion. It spoke directly to them, bypassing their analytical minds and connecting with something deeper. She noticed, for the first time, subtle changes in their expressions. Eyebrows raised slightly, lips parted in concentration, eyes moist with feeling. She did not stop to think about it. Her focus remained on the keys and the sounds that emerged. But somewhere in the back of her mind, she realized that the room was no longer just a hall. It had become a shared space of experience, created entirely through the music she produced. It was a moment suspended in time, delicate and powerful at once. Her hands moved faster now, following an instinct she could not explain. The melody became richer, more layered. She explored the full range of the piano, from the deepest, most resonant notes to the lightest, almost ethereal treble. Every change in tone, every subtle pause, was a deliberate choice. She had learned through years of practice that the beauty of music lay not just in sound, but in the control of silence, in allowing the listener to feel the space between notes. The hall was filled with that awareness now. It was as if the room itself had grown quieter to honor the music. The audience could no longer move casually or chat softly. They were fully absorbed. Some sat rigid, almost afraid to breathe, as if a single movement might break the spell. Others leaned forward, resting their chins in their hands, listening with rapt attention. Even those who were generally reserved, who rarely showed outward emotion, had their eyes locked on her, caught in the delicate power of her performance. The young woman began to play a new section, a melody she had composed during long nights of reflection and solitude. It was personal, almost a confession in sound. She had not planned to play it for anyone, but now it seemed impossible to stop herself. Each chord resonated with her experiences, her hopes, and her quiet struggles, and she realized that the audience, whether they knew it or not, was sharing that journey with her. Their stillness, their attentiveness, their silent reactions were part of the conversation the music had begun. As the notes flowed, she noticed subtle shifts among the legends. They were leaning closer, some tilting their heads, listening with the careful attention of people who could understand both the technical skill and the emotional resonance of a performance. A few whispered softly to one another, acknowledging the extraordinary depth of what was happening. These were not empty compliments or superficial praise. They were genuine, born of experience and insight. It made her feel both nervous and humbled, but she let it strengthen her resolve to continue playing from the heart. The hall seemed to grow smaller, more intimate. It was as if the music had drawn everyone closer together, erasing the distance between audience and performer. The young woman did not notice her own breathing. It had synchronized with the rhythm of her fingers and the resonance of the piano. She was immersed fully, completely, in the act of creation. And yet, despite the intensity, there was an underlying serenity, a calm that made her feel connected to something larger than herself. Every note she played seemed to elicit a reaction. A hand paused mid-gesture, an eye widened slightly, a shoulder relaxed in recognition of the beauty before it. The music was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone in the room, touching each listener in a personal way. Some leaned back, letting the sound wash over them. Others shifted forward, eager to catch every subtle nuance. She could sense that her music had become a bridge, linking hearts and minds without a single word spoken. She moved into the final section of her piece, a passage that built gradually in intensity and complexity. The hall responded almost physically to the crescendo, the energy in the room rising with the music. Legends who had been sitting quietly were now leaning forward, captivated by the subtle power of her expression. It was no longer just a performance. It was an experience shared by all present, a moment that would linger in memory long after the notes faded. Her fingers danced across the keys with precision and feeling, creating a soundscape that was both intimate and expansive. The melody told a story of hope, struggle, and triumph, reflecting the journey she had taken to reach this point. She did not think about recognition, applause, or approval. Her mind and heart were entirely devoted to the music itself. And that authenticity was what made it impossible for anyone to look away or remain indifferent. Slowly, she began to draw the piece to its conclusion. The notes softened, fading gracefully, leaving a lingering resonance in the air. The hall fell into a profound silence, as if the very walls were holding their breath to honor what had just occurred. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, small murmurs of admiration began to ripple through the room. People looked at each other, sharing quiet, astonished glances, and a few whispered words of praise that seemed inadequate to capture the experience. The young woman lifted her hands from the keys and let them hover for a moment, savoring the stillness. She felt a mix of relief, gratitude, and quiet pride, though she would never have described it as pride in herself. It was pride in the music, pride in having been able to share a part of her soul with those who could understand and appreciate it. She stood slowly, feeling the room's attention follow her movements, yet she remained humble and calm, her demeanor unchanged from when she had first entered. A few of the legends approached her, offering quiet words of admiration and curiosity. They asked about her background, her inspirations, and her process. She answered simply, honestly, revealing only what felt natural. There was no pretense, no attempt to impress. The interaction was genuine, a human exchange between artist and audience, a recognition of talent and sincerity that transcended status or fame. The young woman gathered her notebook, feeling a sense of completeness. She had entered the hall quietly, uncertain of her place, and she was leaving having touched the hearts of some of the most experienced and respected musicians in the world. It was a moment she would never forget, a turning point that affirmed the power of honesty, humility, and the courage to share one's gifts, even when the world seems daunting. As she stepped away from the piano, the murmurs of admiration continued, some people moving closer to offer thanks or encouragement. She felt a warmth in her chest, a sense that this experience was more than just a fleeting encounter. It was the beginning of something larger, a path that would allow her music to reach beyond the walls of this hall, to touch lives in ways she had only dreamed of. The quiet confidence that had guided her to this moment remained, strengthened by the acknowledgement and the shared connection she had created through her music. And as she looked around one last time, seeing the faces of those who had stopped to listen, she understood something vital. That greatness often appears quietly, unexpectedly, and that the most profound impact can come from a presence that does not demand attention but earns it through sincerity and talent. The legends had stopped everything to listen, not because she had sought recognition, but because she had shared something true, something that could not be ignored. As the last notes lingered in the hall, the young woman sat for a moment, hands hovering above the piano keys, feeling the warmth of the instrument beneath her fingers. The room remained quiet, the kind of quiet that comes not from waiting, but from people being fully present. For the first time, she allowed herself to look around and see the expressions on the faces of those who had just listened. There was a mixture of awe, respect, and disbelief. Some were whispering to each other, sharing their surprise at the unexpected talent before them. Others simply stared, still caught in the delicate web of her music. A few of the most respected musicians in the room approached her cautiously, their usual confidence replaced by genuine curiosity. One leaned slightly, speaking in a low voice, asking about her background and how she had learned to play. She answered honestly, explaining her small-town beginnings, the worn piano she had grown up with, and the countless hours spent practicing alone. Her humility struck them. She spoke not to impress, but to share the truth of her journey. It was refreshing, rare, and compelling. Another musician, older and well-known for his exacting standards, gave a small nod of acknowledgement, saying that her playing reminded him of the power of simplicity. He spoke about how music could be both technical and emotional, and how often the latter was overlooked in favor of spectacle. She nodded in understanding, grateful for the recognition but even more grateful that her music had conveyed what she truly felt. She did not need grand praise. The acknowledgement of authenticity was enough. A critic who had been quietly observing the entire performance approached next. She listened intently as he shared his thoughts, complimenting the sincerity and emotional depth of her playing. He asked about her inspirations and what motivated her compositions. She spoke simply, describing the feelings she poured into every note, the personal experiences that shaped her melodies, and the desire to connect with others through music. Her answers were thoughtful but unpretentious, revealing a genuine passion for the art form rather than a desire for fame or acclaim. As the conversation continued, other listeners began to gather, quietly expressing their admiration. Some asked if they could see her sheet music, intrigued by the structure of her compositions. She shared it willingly, explaining her choices and the stories behind certain passages. The room, which had once been filled with casual chatter and movement, now felt like a shared space of understanding, where talent and sincerity had bridged the gap between strangers. There was an unspoken respect, a quiet acknowledgement that something special had occurred, something that transcended ordinary performance. Despite the attention, she remained grounded. She did not bask in the recognition, nor did she seek further validation. Her focus was still on the music, on the joy of creating and sharing something meaningful. There was a humility in her manner, a sense that she was simply grateful to be part of this moment, to have been able to express herself in a way that resonated with others. It was a reminder that true artistry is not about ego, but about connection, and that the impact of one's work is measured not in applause alone, but in the quiet influence it leaves on others. The legends in the room continued to approach her, asking questions, offering encouragement, and sharing their own experiences. They spoke of times when they had faced similar moments of uncertainty, when their own talent had been tested or overlooked. She listened, absorbing their stories, feeling both inspired and comforted. It was a rare opportunity to learn from those who had achieved greatness, not just in skill, but in understanding the human side of music, the dedication, the vulnerability, and the courage required to truly share one's gift. One of the musicians, known for mentoring young talent, suggested that she consider performing in other venues, sharing her music more widely. He emphasized that her ability to move an audience without relying on spectacle was a rare quality that could touch many people. She listened carefully, not thinking about fame or opportunity, but feeling a quiet responsibility to continue developing her skills and sharing her music in a meaningful way. It was an encouragement that felt genuine, not driven by ambition, but by recognition of true talent. As the conversation slowly wound down, the room began to return to a normal rhythm, though the energy had shifted. People moved with a sense of awe and respect, quietly discussing the performance and reflecting on the unexpected brilliance they had witnessed. The young woman felt a deep sense of fulfillment, not because she had been praised, but because she had experienced the power of connection through her music. She had entered the hall quietly, unsure of herself, and she had emerged having made a lasting impression, not through showiness, but through sincerity. She gathered her belongings and prepared to leave the hall, but a few people lingered, wanting to offer final words of appreciation. One of the legends approached, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder, saying that her music reminded them of the importance of listening deeply, of valuing the quiet moments that often hold the most beauty. She smiled, feeling both humbled and inspired by the comment. It reinforced her belief that music was not just about performance, but about the shared experience, the emotional dialogue between artist and listener. As she stepped out of the hall, the cool air hit her, a stark contrast to the warmth of the music-filled room. She paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, and allowed herself to reflect on what had just happened. It was a moment that would stay with her forever, a turning point that confirmed her path and her love for music. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet determination to continue exploring her talent, not for fame or recognition, but for the joy of creation and the possibility of touching others in meaningful ways. Walking through the quiet streets after the rehearsal, she thought about the reactions she had witnessed, the awe, the admiration, the genuine appreciation for her honesty and skill. She realized that her music had spoken louder than words ever could, that it had created connections that transcended status, experience, or background. It was a reminder that talent, when combined with humility and sincerity, could have a profound impact, reaching people in ways that were unexpected and lasting. She returned home that evening, her mind buzzing with reflections and new ideas. She sat at her own piano, feeling the familiar keys beneath her fingers, and began to play again. The experience in the hall had changed her, not in the sense of ego or ambition, but in the understanding that her music had the power to move, to connect, and to inspire. She explored new melodies, experimented with harmonies, and allowed herself to play with a freedom she had never known before. It was as if the energy from the hall, from the listeners who had stopped everything to hear her, had infused her own playing with a new vitality. Throughout the following days, she received quiet messages of encouragement from some of the attendees, all praising not just her talent, but her sincerity and the emotional depth of her performance. She responded simply, expressing gratitude and a commitment to continue her journey with music. She felt a sense of community forming, not through formal recognition or publicity, but through shared appreciation for the art she loved. In her private moments, she reflected on the lessons of that day. She realized that true impact does not require loud gestures or grandiose performances. Sometimes, it is the quiet approach, the sincere expression, and the courage to share what one loves that creates the most lasting impression. The experience had shown her that even a single person, moving with authenticity and purpose, could inspire, touch hearts, and earn the respect of those whose judgment often carried great weight. She continued to practice, not with the pressure of fame, but with the joy of creation. Her music became more confident, more expressive, and more deeply connected to her experiences and emotions. The quiet encouragement from the legends, the genuine appreciation from the audience, and the memory of the hall's attentive silence became a guiding force in her development. She knew that each note she played carried the possibility of reaching someone's heart, of creating a shared moment of understanding and beauty. As the days turned into weeks, she began to perform in small gatherings and private sessions, always maintaining the humility and sincerity that had defined her approach. Each performance was an opportunity to connect, to explore the nuances of her art, and to touch those who listened. She did not chase recognition. Instead, she focused on authenticity, letting the music speak for itself. And in doing so, she found that the connections she made were deeper and more meaningful than she had ever imagined. The young woman's journey had taken an important turn. She had approached the piano silently, unsure of what would come, and yet her music had spoken volumes. Legends had stopped everything to listen, not because of spectacle, but because of the honesty and beauty of her expression. It was a lesson that would stay with her forever, that true artistry lies in sincerity, humility, and the courage to share one's gift with the world, no matter how quietly one begins. The days following her unforgettable performance were filled with quiet reflection. She returned to her own piano, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The experience in the hall had left an impression deeper than she could have imagined. Every note she played now carried a memory of the attentive faces, the silent reverence, and the subtle nods of admiration she had witnessed. She knew that this was more than a fleeting moment. It was a turning point, a proof that her music could connect with others in a profound way. She began to receive messages from a few of the people who had been present, expressing their appreciation and encouragement. Some spoke of the way her music had moved them. Others shared their own stories of struggle and passion, creating a thread of connection that extended beyond that single room. She responded simply, expressing gratitude and a quiet desire to continue developing her talent. The exchanges were not about fame or publicity. They were about genuine appreciation for the art of music and the human emotions it could evoke. With each passing day, her confidence grew, but it was tempered by humility. She continued to practice diligently, experimenting with new compositions, exploring different techniques, and allowing her emotions to guide her creativity. Her music evolved naturally, reflecting the lessons she had learned from the hall, from the legends who had noticed her, and from the personal journey she had undertaken for so many years in quiet practice. Every session at her piano was an exploration, a dialogue between her heart and the instrument, and she cherished the process as much as the result. She began to perform in small gatherings, intimate venues where people could truly listen. These were not grand stages, but they were places where the audience's focus and presence allowed her music to shine. She found joy in seeing the same reactions she had noticed in the hall: the pause, the attentive gaze, the subtle expressions of awe and connection. It reminded her that the power of music lay not in the grandeur of the setting, but in the sincerity of the expression and the willingness of listeners to engage with it. Her reputation began to grow quietly, not through media attention or social networks, but through word of mouth and personal recommendations. People spoke of the young woman who approached the piano silently and moved hearts with her melodies. Invitations came for private performances, small recitals, and collaborations with other musicians. Each opportunity was embraced with a mixture of excitement and careful consideration, as she remained committed to maintaining the authenticity that had brought her this far. Through it all, she remained grounded. She remembered the feeling of entering the hall, uncertain and quiet, and the overwhelming sense of connection that had followed her performance. It was a reminder that her journey was about more than recognition. It was about the joy of creating music that could touch lives. She made a conscious effort to honor that principle in every performance, ensuring that each note she played was infused with the same sincerity and care that had captured the attention of the legends in the hall. She also began to mentor a few young musicians who showed promise, offering guidance not only in technique but in the philosophy of music she had come to embrace. She emphasized the importance of authenticity, of listening deeply, and of understanding the emotional resonance of every note. Her own experiences served as examples, illustrating how a quiet presence and a sincere approach could create opportunities and leave a lasting impression. She encouraged them to play not for recognition, but for the love of music and the connections it could foster. As time passed, she found herself reflecting more on the day she had approached the piano silently in that grand hall. She thought about the anticipation, the nervousness, the focus, and the eventual connection with the audience. It had taught her valuable lessons about courage, humility, and the importance of believing in oneself, even when the world seemed daunting. These lessons became guiding principles in her life, influencing not just her music but her interactions with people, her decisions, and her approach to challenges. The young woman's music continued to evolve, incorporating elements of her personal experiences, the emotions she had encountered, and the stories she wished to share. Each performance, whether in a small room or a slightly larger venue, carried the essence of that pivotal moment. The realization that genuine expression and quiet dedication could command attention and create a lasting impact. She found fulfillment not in accolades, but in the smiles, the quiet tears, and the thoughtful expressions of those who listened. Her journey also inspired others to pursue their own passions, showing that talent and sincerity could be recognized even in unexpected ways. Friends, fellow musicians, and students alike looked to her as an example of how dedication, humility, and authenticity could open doors. She never claimed to have all the answers, but her story demonstrated that opportunities could arise when one remained true to oneself and embraced the courage to share their gifts, even quietly and without fanfare. She continued to perform, each time approaching the piano with the same calm determination and quiet focus. She allowed herself to be guided by the emotions she wished to express and the connections she hoped to create. Her music became a dialogue, a living experience shared with her audience. Each performance reaffirmed her belief in the power of sincerity and the impact of heartfelt expression. Over the years, her name became quietly known among circles of musicians and music lovers. She was invited to participate in workshops, intimate concerts, and collaborative projects. Yet she remained true to her principles, choosing opportunities that aligned with her values and allowed her music to remain genuine. She learned to navigate the balance between recognition and authenticity, understanding that the true reward lay not in fame but in the shared experience of music. Looking back, she realized that the day she had approached the piano silently in the grand hall had been the beginning of a lifelong journey. It had shown her that even a quiet presence could leave a powerful mark, that genuine expression could transcend expectations, and that music had the ability to connect hearts across backgrounds, experiences, and expectations. The legends who had stopped everything to listen had unknowingly given her a lesson that went far beyond applause. They had shown her the value of authenticity and the transformative power of sincere artistry. In her quiet moments, she reflected on the journey she had undertaken and the people she had met along the way. She thought about the young musicians she mentored, the listeners who had shared their emotions with her, and the legends whose attention had once been her first true recognition. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the experiences, the lessons, and the connections that had shaped her path. Every note she played was now imbued with that gratitude, that understanding of what it meant to create something meaningful and share it with the world. Her life became a continuous exploration of music and human connection, each performance an opportunity to touch hearts and share a part of herself. The quiet courage she had shown that first day at the piano remained with her, guiding her choices and inspiring her to continue creating with sincerity and passion. She understood that true success was not measured by fame or applause, but by the impact one could have on others, the connections made, and the authenticity preserved in every expression of art. And so, she continued her journey, approaching each new piano with the same quiet determination, allowing her music to speak for itself, touching lives in ways that were profound, unexpected, and lasting. Her story became one of inspiration, a reminder that even the simplest, most unassuming presence could create a ripple of change, leaving a legacy not just of talent, but of sincerity, humility, and the courage to share one's gift with the world. The legend of the young woman who approached the piano silently and commanded the attention of the greatest remained, not as a tale of fame, but as a testament to the enduring power of music and the human spirit.